quick question about the Harry and Meghan, because Tom Bauer, who's, barn burner of a book about the royal family, and was number one everywhere. He was on with our mutual friend Dan Wooten talking about Harry's autobiography, which is slated for release, I guess now this November. And according to Dan and others, the royal family does not want to see the publication of this book. They fear and believe that it's going to be very negative about the royal family. And now, given the fact that the Queen just died, the timing is far from ideal. So Bowers goes on with Dan during GB News's royal coverage. And here's what happened.
In the end, it's down to whether Harry and Meghan are prepared to apologise to Kate and William. My suspicion is, I'm convinced they won't apologise. Even worse, I'm told tonight that Harry is insisting that his book is published in November.
You're kidding.
Absolutely, it's absolutely astonishing. He's insisting. Apparently the publishers are not too certain, but he says that if they don't publish, he will breach a contract. That's what I'm told. And it's extraordinary, because I think that's pretty, on the other hand, it fits the bill, because Harry and Meghan's finances depend entirely on the book and on Netflix. And also, I think they're convinced they're in the right, and they want to get their own back. And I think that part of the problem in getting them to come out on that walk yesterday was very much because they can't decide whether they should appear or not. After all, they didn't plan to be here for a funeral. They thought they were coming for just a visit to promote themselves. They've been caught up in it.
What do you make of that, Nigel? If he comes out with this book?
Tom Bauer is the biographer of our times, written the most incredible books about members of the royal family, about big business figures, political figures, Boris Johnson, Richard Branson, you name it. I'm very pleased that it wasn't him, but somebody else that wrote a big biography about me, because Tom Bauer is really good at putting his finger on those personality flaws. And by the way, we all have them, of course. We all have them. So would Harry go ahead with this book? Well, think about this. When the Oprah Winfrey interview happened, right, Harry and Meghan knew that his grandfather was at death's door. They knew that Philip was not going to make his 100th birthday, and that was only 10 weeks away, and they still went ahead with the interview. This trip to the UK, they came here this time. Meghan gave a speech up in Manchester. They went to Dusseldorf for an event. Do you know, they weren't even going to go and visit the Queen on this trip. And I thought Charles's words in the King's speech were very interesting. He talked about Kate, or Catherine, as we're now branding her, and William as the new Prince and Princess of Wales. But when he referred to Harry and Meghan, he didn't call them the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. No. He talked about my love for Harry, Meghan, and their family, who are now building their new life overseas. This is what King Charles III said. And I read into that, you're living on the west coast of America. We want nothing to do with you. Please stay there.
Interesting. Well, I did think it was interesting that Meghan comes over. She goes out there to sort of shake the hands of people. And let's be honest about it. Meghan and Harry made the Queen's last 2 years much more difficult than they needed to be. I mean, there's something galling about seeing them glad-handing with the mourners when name me somebody else who caused more agita to the poor Queen in her last 2 years of life than those two. Right? I mean, it's just...
It was so disrespectful. It was so wrong in every way. But I tell you what's interesting. The Queen's body is going to arrive, Queen's coffin will arrive at Buckingham Palace in about 2.5 hours' time. Okay? And there will be a military detachment, of course. There will be the King and the Queen Consort. There will be the Prince and Princess of Wales. But the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will not be there. And what this tells you, through the words that King Charles used, through the very fact they will not be there to meet the Queen's body as it arrives in Buckingham Palace, and goodness me, what a somber emotional moment that's going to be in 2.5 hours. But the fact they're not there tells you everything. The firm, as the royal family have known, have effectively excommunicated them because they know Harry will go ahead with this book, do it to make money, and do his best, not just to damage the monarchy and his own father and brother, but he'll do it because he wants to damn the United Kingdom, the British around the world. I've never seen such disloyalty in all of my life. Quite what Meghan's done to him, how it's come to this, I simply don't know.
She was glad-handing with the mourners the other day, and it made news that a few of them refused to shake her hand. You can see it in the video. A couple of women just looked down or didn't extend the hand. And now you've got Meghan's followers on Twitter. And we're showing the video for the people who watch us on YouTube. The woman putting on her sunglasses avoids Meghan. Then there's a woman in a dark blue shirt with gray hair who clearly does not want to shake her hand. And now you've got all these people on Twitter accusing these women, wait for it, of racism. That they're racists because they...
Do you know what? Aren't we getting slightly bored with all this?
Yes.
I mean, the use of this word. I mean, we should stop do you know what? We should stop even worrying about it. It's become utterly meaningless. It's a substitute for any form of engagement or intelligent debate. And I think we've got to just stop worrying about all these attacks. They mean nothing.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of the Oprah thing? Because I will say Oprah weighed in on Meghan and Harry today. I mean, she was in on ground zero of the racism accusation Meghan and Harry launched against the royal family. And now Oprah's calling for sort of a healing moment. We have the soundbite in an interview she gave to Extra. It's soundbite 1.
We lost another trailblazer this week, the Queen. Of course, you sat down with Meghan and Harry. We're seeing the four of them together now in London. Is there a hope out there that in some way her passing would be a way to unify the family, maybe heal some wounds?
Well, this is what I think. I think in all families, my father passed recently this summer. And when all families come together for a common ceremony, the ritual of, burying your dead, there's an opportunity for peacemaking. Yeah. And hopefully there will be that.
Yeah. Well, that is true, of course. Yes, I mean, there's barely a family on the planet where someone's not speaking to someone. I mean, that's just the way families. Well, it's true, isn't it?
Very true.
And then we all come together. It's the uncle's funeral or whatever it is, and we all come together, and it is an opportunity for rapprochement to be made. And there was a minor rapprochement when William reached out, and they went out, as you say, in Windsor and looked at the flowers and met some of the mourners there. But it has no long-term future if he's going to go ahead with this book. So, Oprah, sorry, I'm not with you at all. And can I just say also, she must be the worst interviewer on the planet. The idea that Oprah Winfrey is this big genius. Well, so what happened with that interview was, of course, the first half of it was with Meghan. Halfway through, Harry gets dragged in, directly contradicts some of the things that Meghan has said in the first half, and Winfrey didn't even pick up on it. So I'm not particularly impressed with her ability to do interviews and to find out the truth.
So I love that you revisited this theory in Outliers as the mother of 3 young children, ages 9, 11, and 12. I read Outliers, and I'm one of those parents that got swept up in it. Couple of things in there. And I love that you take this hard look at it. Did I write a primer for neurotic middle-class helicopter parents? And then you make the point, stop the tyranny of birthdays. If you were somebody who was, quote, red-shirted your child because he was born or she was born in the second half of the year, it may be because of this book. So I think it's hilarious that you went back and took this self-critical look at yourself and your theories. Good for you. Doesn't mean you were wrong, but you kind of think people may have taken it in the wrong way. Explain.
Yeah. So in Outliers, one of the arguments that I make is how much your birthday matters in terms of sports achievement and academic achievement. And there's no question. It's a huge issue. If you got a room full of 10-year-olds and one kid is born in January and one kid is born in December, the kid born in January has been around for 10%, their life is 10% longer. That's huge. And when we look at evidence of things like, not just grades, but how likely are you as a kid to be diagnosed with a learning disorder, or disciplined, or suspended, or categorized with, painted with some kind of like dark brush. And what we find overwhelmingly is that kids who are relatively the youngest in their class are hugely proportionately overrepresented in those kind of categories, and underrepresented in things like gifted and talented programs. And so it's clearly an issue. The question is, what should you do about it? And when I wrote my book, what I wanted was for schools to come up with thoughtful solutions to this problem, right? So you can imagine, for example, an elementary school might say, oh, if there's such a big difference between an 8-year-old born in January and one born in December, let's divide our classes by birth month. Let's have all the January, February, and March kids in one class, and the April, May, and June kids in another class, and so on, right? That would be one thoughtful response. That's not what happened. What happened was parents just held their kids back if they were the relatively youngest in the class. That doesn't solve the problem. That just creates another class of kids who are suddenly at the bottom of the barrel, right? So it's like, I was like, this is not what I intended to happen. This was a cry for institutional change, right? I use the example of hockey, that if you look at hockey and lots of other sports, the older kids have this huge advantage and they end up being hugely overrepresented at kind of elite levels. The solution to that is for coaches and scouts and all to get smarter about adjusting for the fact that a relatively younger kid is going to look like he or she is not as talented when they're very young. And it's not about talent, it's about their age, right? We've got to get smarter about recognizing what talent is. We shouldn't just be holding everybody back, right? Which doesn't solve the problem. So I did this episode of my podcast giving examples of ways to solve the problem, thoughtful ways of solving the problem, as opposed to just everyone leaving it on parents. We shouldn't be leaving this responsibility of giving your kid a fair chance to the parent, right? That's nuts. Design a system that's thoughtful and intelligent.
But here's a question for you, and I loved your episode today, but my question is, at what point do the kids catch up? Because if you say to the school, okay, my 8-year-old now, there's a big difference between him and the kid who was born 11 months earlier. I mean, doesn't that kid always have the advantage over my December baby? Or can you look at sports coaches and teachers and say, no, the data show by 11th grade, physically, all those advantages have evened out, and you should be thinking about him as a future tennis or baseball or football star right now, just one who's going to come to life for you a year later than the guys you're looking at now.
You're right. So eventually, of course, these initial differences even out. The problem is that we put in place systems which identify kids at a very young age. And so for example, imagine you have a gifted and talented program that you start in 5th grade. That gives the kids who are selected for it an advantage. So they're now getting better quality instruction, access to different curricula. They're surrounded by the smartest kids. They're getting the best teachers. So the other kids they never catch up. They may catch up physically and biologically, but the kids who had that early advantage are getting the additional advantage of an institutional boost, right?
The same is true in sports.
Right? You're on the travel squad at the age of 10, and all of a sudden you're playing twice as many games, better coaches, and you end up being better because of that early advantage. It's a real problem, Megyn. I don't mean to diminish it. It's a serious problem. It just requires more thoughtful, to be more thoughtfully addressed.
One of the things you point out is when we take these standardized tests on which so many schools base so many things, we don't account for birth date there either. So the 3rd graders have to take the same test, in like New York State or Connecticut, where I am now, what have you, even though they may be almost 12 months younger than the kids sitting next to them. And you were saying, what about having the kids who were born in September take the standardized test in September. And the kids who were born in January take it in January. Like, they don't do any of that. It's a good point.
Yeah, this is a guy. I was talking to this guy. So England is one of the countries that, at least in the area of sports, has thought about this problem most in the most kind of serious and profound way. So I was chatting with this English guy named Adam Kelly, who's deeply involved in trying to fix this problem in soccer, because he thinks he points out you leave a lot of talent on the table when you don't adjust for these age differences at an early level. Like there are all these kids who are the relatively youngest in their class. You think that they're slower and shorter and not as talented, and so they totally never get a chance to perform on the soccer field. Anyway, I'm chatting with this guy, and he just makes this point. It never occurred to me. He's like, why on earth do we make middle school kids take a standardized test all at the same time? Mm-hmm. That's crazy, right? Why would you that's 12-month advantage for an 11-year-old? That's nuts, right? Yeah. And the idea that it's 2022. We've been doing this for 100 years, and it has yet to occur to anyone that it's a bad idea, that it's impossible to accurately compare 11-year-olds, right? When some of them have a 12-month advantage over others, right? We haven't adjusted for this problem. And I can't believe it's taken a century and we're still twiddling our thumbs about how to address it.
The folks over at The View making more stupid news again today. I'm sorry, the show, it's the worst show on television. I do not understand how it still has an audience. Sunny Hostin, who used to be kind of normal. She wasn't obsessed with race at every turn. I used to be on, in my very young years as a Cub reporter at Fox, the O'Reilly Factor with her, and she wasn't this way. She's gotten swept up too. In any event, her latest comment is, we will never be unified as a country unless we have a racial reckoning to address 400 years of oppression. Here she was the other day.
We came together as a country because it was a foreign adversary.
Yeah.
That is why I think it was an act of foreign terrorism. And so we felt like, how dare you come to our country and harm us? The biggest threat to our country today, says the FBI's director, is white supremacy and domestic terrorism. Merrick Garland said the biggest threat to our democracy is white supremacy and domestic terrorism. How do you come together when it's homegrown terror? And we have never addressed why there is that issue that remains in this country 400 years later. And until we get to that, until we have accountability, we are not, I don't think, ever going to be able to come close.
What do you make of it?
I mean, just notice how there's no elaboration on that. What does a racial reckoning truly look like to you? Because we've been through the Civil Rights Act and Jim Crow is gone. We are legally all equal. The criminal justice system that they use to substantiate their claims about systemic racism, debunked. Policing, debunked. We have affirmative action that's been going on for nearly or a little over 50 years in this country. Where is the racial reckoning necessary? Where is it that we as a society need to be uplifting and helping Black people that we haven't already done? And she never elaborates on that. It's just beautiful, pretty words that sounds like there's something we need to get behind and fight for, and they mean nothing.
Mm-hmm. I have a genuine fear that this type of attitude is going to create racism, where it was dying in the United States. It wasn't eliminated, but it was dying. I don't think you can just keep looking around at white people and saying, you have to pay reparations. You have to make up for what these slaveholders did. Your kid can't go to the college and the Asian people can't go to this college or whatever. Because every spot has to be used to make up for sins that you had nothing to do with, but you benefit from because you're part of the patriarchy, you're part of this. I don't think you can have that system sustain for very long without creating real resentment.
Yep, you're absolutely right. I think we're getting more and more divisive along the lines of race here in this country. I mean, we're seeing a couple of lawsuits that are going to hit the Supreme Court this year of Asian Americans suing universities because they're not getting into university at the same standard or level as people of color. And if we continue down this route, especially with the demonization of white people, honestly, in the next 50 years, we're going to see another civil rights movement that's based on white Americans and Asian Americans. It's ridiculous to me. And as much as they try to speak about unity and about coming together and about getting rid of the divisiveness that we're all facing right now. They are fueling it like no other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the segregated dorms and, like you go to camp at certain colleges now and like the white people don't live with the black people. And
right.
How is this progress? This is deeply disturbing. And what goes on in those dorms while you only have one color group sitting with one color group? What are they thinking about the others? It's like back in my day, melting pot, and you didn't even think about color because it was like you had every color represented. It was just like, are you a douchebag or aren't you?
Right. It's really about your morals, your values, who you are as an individual. And we've gotten so lost in our definition of what it means to be an individual. I've been filming some TV shows recently where they're bringing on, these left-leaning experts to defend their side. And the way that they view identity and individualism is simply ridiculous. Saying things like your race, your gender, your sexuality are what make up who you are as a person. That is who you are. It's amazing to me that we've managed to allow these ideas to sort of fester and grow for so long. Now, so many people have just reduced themselves down to these 3 or 4 superficial characteristics, and they think that makes them as a person.
Now they've done a comprehensive investigation. And again, BYU's initial instinct was to apologize. They felt awful. They believed her, but they said, we're going to investigate to be fair. And this comprehensive investigation has found that it didn't happen. There's absolutely no evidence of it, to the contrary. So she comes out and says, BYU's statement does not change my position. In fact, the statement and the findings are in keeping with what I and many others anticipated. Keep in mind, Vivek, this godmother, Lisa, likes to refer to white people as crackers and has got several racist tweets of her own, which now she's made her account private. Daily across America, she continues, the burden of proof in instances like these involving people of color, as well as marginalized people, economically disadvantaged people, and disempowered people, is shifted unfairly and without hesitation. She feels the burden of proof was shifted upon her goddaughter, who, so far as I can tell, wasn't required to do much, if anything, in this investigation. They just sat and reviewed hours and hours of videotapes, talked to everybody who was nearby. Maybe they took her testimonial as well. But the point is, she crosses her arms and says, no. And if it comes out against me, you've unfairly shifted the burden of proof on me.
So one of the things that I reject wholesale is this post-Foucault worldview of defining all human relations in terms of power structures, okay? She used the word disempowered. So I reject that worldview. But in this situation, if you're going to embrace a power structure-based description of what happened there, the disempowered person was actually the person who was accused. There's no doubt about it. And that might be different. 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, a century ago, the tables may have been turned in a very different direction. But today, in the year 2022, there's little doubt in my mind that the person who was in the disempowered position was no doubt the accused. And even still, with the tilt of that investigation and BYU's initial posture going into it, already ruining that person's life in many measures, still could not find a shred of evidence to support it. What does it remind me of? It reminds me of at the end of the Jussie Smollett case. Okay, so this is a guy who faked a hate crime hoax. The prosecutors initially actually closed off the case because it looked like it smelled really rotten, but actually had to be reopened by federal prosecutors. Speaking of Michelle Obama, by the way, I can't resist bringing this back in. She was a friend of Jussie Smollett's, and it was an acquaintance, a chief of staff, I believe, of Michelle Obama, who contacted the initial prosecutors in the case to get them to drop charges. It was only after President Trump then directed federal officials to reopen the investigation that any of this even came to light. We found a guy who literally was paying 2 other black men, one of whom he had a homosexual intimate relationship, to pose as white supremacists. That is how hard it is to find a white supremacist to beat up a famous Hollywood actor, is to have to pay them to be able to, you have to be in an intimate relationship with one of them. But the funny thing, the cherry on top is, so I don't know if that's the full extent of what happened here in the BYU case or not, but the part that reminded me of it is when the godmother's quote you described reminds me of the defense attorney in the Smollett case, who at the end of the case, she was losing really badly. I mean, the trial was embarrassing, right? If you're in the defense side here, this is Jussie Smollett as defendant for faking the hate crime hoax, that she then claims racism on the part of the judge, who she claimed began to lunge at her because she was a woman of color in the courtroom. You remember that? I mean,
Yes.
it's amazing how this story, if that were a one-off incident, then I don't think it would be worth talking about, right? A lot of people do a lot of stupid things. They're not all worth commenting on. This is different. This is part of a pattern that repeats itself. And I think it's more interesting if we bring this up, not to, embarrass or call out any particular individual from a partisan perspective, from Michelle Obama to Kamala Harris to this attorney, to this godmother. It's more interesting if we're just curious about what is the psychological, pathological state of mind of an entire country that produces this same narrative time and again. And one of the things that's uncomfortable for some of us on the right, I don't know how you feel about this, Megyn, is that I actually see that pathology spreading to the right, actually, through the narratives of
embracing
white
victimhood
identity or conservative victimhood identity. And I think that's how the woke left wins, is not with a bang, but with a whimper. Where, I think conservatives fall into the narrative of saying, well, you're a victim. Well, guess what? I'm an even bigger victim. And we're
now
going to
victim
find out
you.
the victim at Olympics.
So Kamala Harris goes on Meet the Press and like the Homeland Security Secretary not long before her, pronounced that the border is secure. Here's what she said. This is SOT 6.
Would you call the border secure?
I think that there is no question that we have to do what the president and I asked Congress to do. Is the first request we made. Pass a bill to create a pathway to citizenship. The border is secure, but we also have a broken immigration system, in particular over the last 4 years before we came in, and it needs to be fixed.
We're going to have 2 million people cross this border for the first time ever. You're confident this border is secure?
We have a secure border in that is a priority for any nation, including ours and our administration. But there are still a lot of problems that we are trying to fix, given the deterioration that happened over the last 4 years.
We have a secure border in that is a priority for any nation. What? So we don't. It's a priority, but we don't actually have one. Good for Chuck Todd for at least pushing back a bit. And then she tries to blame whatever problems are there on Trump. For all of Trump's controversies, not securing the border isn't really one you can lay on him. Go ahead, Cheryl. What do you make of it, having just been there?
Well, I go to the border a couple times a year just to see what's really going on. I just got back from Eagle Pass, Texas, where I usually I interview the officials from these areas in the border towns. Primarily, they are Democrats and Hispanic. And they would say, and did say, these statements that claim the border is secure are delusional. It's objectively false. You can see that they're overrun in their own words. They can't handle the influx. They have begged for visits from Vice President Harris, from Biden, from any representatives that would come and take a look and try to provide some assistance. I've never seen the border this open. Well, that makes sense because this is a record-setting time. But in all my visits to the border kind of has a personality. It changes a lot based on policies that are at play and what's going on from the highest level in Washington, D.C. And this is just unbelievable. But I hate to harp on these stories from the poor illegal immigrants because I know that's only a piece of this problem. But I spoke in great detail to the Venezuelans and others who are coming here now and making these perilous trips and how they have to cross through a jungle to get through Colombia and are almost all attacked by what they call the indigenous peoples who now have a pipeline in the jungle that they rob and rape people. I heard stories that I believe from the illegal immigrants saying that they watched 12-year-olds getting raped, that when the men interfered and tried to protect the girl, in one case, the men were raped. These people are robbed, so then they don't have the money to pay the checkpoints of the cartels to be allowed to progress to the Mexico-U.S. border, so they have to keep working. Family members may be kidnapped and tortured until they can come up with additional money to pay the cartels. We are making the cartels rich beyond our wildest imagination by allowing all of this. And then hundreds of them have drowned and died, a record number, trying to cross into the U.S. once they get that far. It is a disaster in every sense of the word for them, for the border towns, and for the United States. I urge people, if they're interested, go to fullmeasure.news. My story that I aired on Sunday on my TV program lays out all of this in great detail and has the video evidence too.
Well, and one of the things addressed is, where's the wall and where's the effort to stop the people from walking into the town? Like, why aren't we trying to stop that anymore? Because Border Patrol's not.
You know, one of the interesting things I found, I was there to see how the Texas state efforts were working, because Texas deployed 1,400 National Guard troops and all kinds of rangers and resources of their own. And they've built 100 miles of their own barrier at their own expense to try to secure the border. What did I learn? All of that money and effort simply goes to help process those who come in, because they don't have the authority legally to turn them back or arrest them. They have to turn them over to Border Patrol. So all of that effort has resulted not in turning anybody away or quelling the numbers, but in a helping hand, as it was called when I did an interview with an official there. All the resources just providing more hands to process more people to come into the United States.
We have that. Actually, we have a soundbite from that. And again, we should check it out at fullmeasure.news as well. But here's a bit. This is soundbite 8 from Cheryl's reporting.
So there's nothing that can be done technically right now to keep the numbers down, to keep people from coming?
No, ma'am. They have a free open range coming across the river right now.
Do they climb over the fence?
No, they let them through.
Border Patrol lets them through?
Yeah, well, if there's like right now, they still got places where they haven't finished the fence, and they got gates. They let them through. I've never seen anything like that. I've been here all my life.
What do you attribute that to?
Mr. Biden. They're just letting them in.
I'm very disappointed in the federal government, to be honest. And I've opened the invitation to anyone in the administration, whether it be president, vice president, or one of his representatives, to please come to Eagle Pass, Texas. We are part of the United States.
Here in Eagle Pass, before our local firefighters would have to deal with around 20, 25 drownings a year. Now they're dealing with over 30 drownings a month. Pulling babies out of the water is not normal.
My God. And can we just hear again? This is the Vice President of the United States who's been placed in charge of securing the border. Here's her take on what's happening. Listen to it one more time.
Would you call the border secure?
I think that there is no question that we have to do what the president and I asked Congress to do. Is the first request we made. Pass a bill to create a pathway to citizenship. The border is secure, but we also have a broken immigration system, in particular over the last 4 years before we came in, and it needs to be fixed.
We're going to have 2 million people cross this border for the first time ever. You're confident this border is secure?
We have a secure border in that is a priority for any nation, including ours and our administration. But there are still a lot of problems that we are trying to fix, given the deterioration that happened over the last 4 years.
What specifically? I mean, truly, what is she talking about? What did Trump do to make the border less secure? Her answer is basically what we need is amnesty, which doesn't decrease immigration across the southern border. And we need to get rid of Trump, which we did, right? So she's blaming the 4 years prior. And it's secure in that it's a priority. There's zero evidence that it's a priority. He's trying to undo the ability to turn people back under the COVID regulation right now. The only reason he hasn't done that is because of the courts.
Trump's last year in office, those numbers came way down. They were still bad, but something like 400,000 border encounters. Biden's first year in office, 1.2 million. We're working on 2 million already this year with time left in the fiscal year. And I can tell you, based on my investigation, one of the biggest immediate things that would make a difference and did make a difference under President Trump was that Remain in Mexico policy, which said that if people wanted to claim asylum, they would wait for their court date in Mexico. And Mexico agreed to that, to take them. And that immediately stopped a lot of traffic, because nobody wants to go through what these poor people go through and pay the thousands of dollars and risk their lives only to have to sit in Mexico. So immediately there was an effect with people not trying to come and risk their lives and pay the cartels to come to the United States. So that's a huge, people ask me what could be done. That is something that would have an immediate impact based on what we've seen in the recent past that has made a big difference when President Biden decided to stop that program.